Have you ever wondered what your own shadow truly looks like when you're not looking? What if, one night, under the pouring rain, you glanced down and saw that your shadow was no longer your own? This is the story of Linus Howard, a man who sold his soul for $1 million, and the ancient, hungry thing that came with it. A story that begins with a desperate gamble and ends with a reflection that will haunt you long after the tale is over. Tonight, we descend into a modern Gothic nightmare, where the lines between luck and curse, between ambition and madness, are blurred beyond recognition. So, get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let the sound of the fire guide you. Now, let's drift into The Blood-Red Cricket's Curse, a bedtime story for adults, and a cautionary tale about the price of desire. And remember, some cages you don't see until you're already locked inside. If you've ever wondered what hell is like, let me describe it. It smells of disinfectant, cheap perfume, and despair. Its soundtrack is the eternal chime of Las Vegas slot machines, underscored by the frantic thumping of your own heart. And I, Linus Howard, the last son of a fading English line, was on my knees in that very inferno, owing a debt I could never repay. That was 3 months ago. The memory is a fresh scar, but the reality it spawned is the cramped New York apartment I now call home. It's a far cry from the Howard estate in Kent. Here, dust motes dance in the slivers of light cutting through the blinds, illuminating the ghosts of a life I used to lead. A few half-packed cardboard boxes littered the floor like tombstones. On the wall, a slightly less faded rectangle marked where a portrait of my great-grandfather once hung, a stern-faced man who'd apparently conquered India but would, I suspect, be utterly defeated by my current predicament. My fingers closed around the cool, heavy silver of my pocket watch, the one thing I'd refused to pack away. The Howard crest was engraved on the cover, and inside the family motto, Pride and Perseverance. I traced the words with my thumb. The perseverance felt like a cruel joke these days, but the pride was all I had left. It was the armor I wore every time I stepped outside, the invisible shield that, in my mind at least, still separated me from the chaos of this city. The shrill ring of the telephone shattered the silence. I knew who it was before I picked it up. Henderson, the landlord. His voice was a nasal drone, a stark contrast to the cultivated tones I'd been raised with. Mr. Howard, the rent. It was due on the 1st. I summoned every ounce of that Howard pride, letting it smooth the edges of my voice into something calm, almost bored. Mr. Henderson, my apologies. A wire transfer from a client in London has been held up by the most tedious banking bureaucracy. You know how these international affairs can be. I spun a web of lies as elegant and fragile as a spider's silk, mentioning vague trust funds and liquidating antique assets. I could almost hear his skepticism through the line. When I finally hung up, the silence in the room felt heavier, more accusing. Dignity, Linus, I whispered to the empty room, my voice tight. You still have that. It was then that a heavy fist hammered on my door. Not a knock, a hammering. The sound echoed in the cramped space, a death knell for my carefully maintained composure. Every nerve in my body went cold. I knew who it was. Salvatore's men. I opened the door to find them filling the doorway. Rico, a mountain of a man, stood silently, his presence a physical weight. Beside him was Tony, lean and wiry, with eyes that never stayed still. Linus, Tony said, his voice a mocking sing-song. He didn't wait for an invitation, brushing past me into the apartment. His eyes swept over the boxes, the barren walls, and he smirked. Salvatore doesn't like waiting. Your fancy accent don't pay the bills. I straightened my spine, the worn fabric of my waistcoat feeling thin as paper. Please assure Mr. Salvatore that a Howard's word is his bond. The capital is merely... Tony stepped closer, jabbing a finger into my chest. The capital is late. We're not your bank, your lordship. We're the collection agency. Then, Rico moved. With a speed that belied his size, his hand shot out and dipped into the inner pocket of my jacket. He pulled out my pocket watch. My heart stopped. That watch wasn't just an object. It was a tether to who I was, to centuries of history. He held it in his massive, coarse hand, the delicate silver looking absurdly small and vulnerable. This thing worth anything? Rico's voice was a low rumble. A cold, primal fear seized me, colder than any fear I'd felt at the poker table. It was the fear of utter erasure. "Please," I said, and the word came out stripped bare, all pretense of dignity gone. It was a raw, naked plea. "Return that to me." Rico's eyes, flat and empty, held mine for a moment that stretched into an eternity. Then, with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, he tossed the watch back to me. I fumbled, catching it against my chest, the metal warm from his grip. 3 months, Linus," Tony said, his face inches from mine. "1 million, or we start taking things that can't be replaced. And I ain't talking about the shiny trinkets." They left, pulling the door shut behind them with a soft final click. I stood there, alone in the silence, the weight of the watch heavy in my palm. The faint, lingering scent of Tony's cheap cologne mixed with the smell of my own fear. I looked around at the boxes, the faded patch on the wall, the dust settling in the aftermath of their invasion. Hell wasn't just in Vegas, it was here, in this room, and I was still on my knees. The silence after Rico and Tony left was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. I clutched the pocket watch so tightly the engraved crest must have left its mark on my palm. Pride and perseverance. The words echoed mockingly in my mind. What good was pride against the blunt reality of $1 million debt and men who broke bones for a living? Perseverance felt like a slow, grinding death by attrition. I poured a finger of whiskey, the last of the good stuff I'd brought from London. The amber liquid did little to burn away the cold knot of fear in my gut. 1 million. In 3 months. It was an impossible number. Selling the watch might buy me a week, maybe 2. It wouldn't save me. My gaze swept over the half-packed boxes. Most contained books, artifacts, the detritus of a life built on inherited taste rather than self-made wealth. Desperation began to curdle into a frantic, clawing energy. There had to be something, a final, overlooked asset, a Hail Mary pass from the grave. That's when my eyes landed on the old Tanmu sandalwood box, shoved to the back of the highest shelf, my grandfather's. Alistair Howard had been an explorer, a man fascinated by the occult and the exotic, much to the chagrin of his more staid descendants. I'd always considered his relics as mere curiosities. Now, desperation made me reconsider. I pulled the box down, sending a cloud of dust dancing in the dim light. Inside, beneath a few faded silk scarves and a tarnished compass, lay a leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked, the pages brittle and smelling of age and sandalwood. My heart hammered with a foolish, nascent hope. Perhaps a sketch of a lost masterpiece? A map to some forgotten deposit? I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning my grandfather's elegant, looping script. It was mostly observations, notes on tribal rituals in Cameroon, the geometry of Egyptian pyramids. Then, a yellowed newspaper clipping fluttered out. The headline was stark: "Blood-red cricket fetches king's ransom at SF auction." Below it was a grainy photo of a man in a top hat holding a small, dark specimen. The price quoted made my breath hitch. Even adjusted for inflation, it was a staggering sum. My eyes flew to my grandfather's notes in the margin. 12th November 1912, Guangzhou. Heard a most peculiar tale from a tea merchant. Spoke of a goo-goo spirit, a vengeful essence bound to a living insect. A cricket of condolence, they call it. It is said to grant its master uncanny luck in games of chance, feeding on the wielder's ambition. A poisoned chalice, surely. My skin prickled. A poisoned chalice. I read on. Asterisk. 15th August 1920, San Francisco. Attended the auction. Saw the specimen, the blood-red cricket. The air around its case felt thin, cold. The bidding frenzy was a form of mass hysteria. J.P. Vanderbilt secured it. A month later, he was dead. Physicians baffled. Internal hemorrhaging. Organs purportedly showing signs of decay. Coincidence? Or the price of the cup being drunk? Asterisk. The final entry, the ink a darker, more frantic scrawl, sent a genuine chill down my spine. Let this be a warning. The creature is a locus for a malevolent will. It does not grant luck. It facilitates a transfer of fortune, always at a terrible cost. It preys on the greedy, the desperate, the proud. It mirrors their hunger until it consumes them. See it and go mad. Possess it and perish. Let no Howard ever seek this accursed thing. A normal man would have recoiled. A sane man would have slammed the book shut, burned it, and taken his chances with Salvatore's enforcers. I was neither normal nor sane. The warning was just noise. All I heard was the number from that newspaper, the echo of that king's ransom. My fear began to transmute, not into courage, but into a feverish, avaricious glee. This wasn't a warning, it was a map, a dangerous, forbidden map, but a map nonetheless. My grandfather's superstition was my salvation. This poisoned chalice could buy back my life. The search was not easy. The blood-red cricket was a ghost, a myth among a very specific, secretive underworld. My first lead was a pompous entomology professor at Columbia who laughed me out of his office. The second, a shady online forum that cost me $500 for a set of coordinates that led to a derelict warehouse in Queens. I spent a freezing night hiding from security, only to find nothing but rat droppings and the lingering smell of failure. Each dead end cost me money I didn't have, time I couldn't spare, and another shred of my dwindling pride. The pressure from Salvatore's men was escalating. Tony's friendly reminders were now daily, his voice dripping with mock concern that was more threatening than any shout. It was my third lead, gathered from a whispered conversation with a terrified-looking antiques dealer in Chinatown, who demanded cash up front, that finally bore fruit. If such a thing exists, he'd said, eyes darting, you find it not in a shop, but in the Disashi, the underground market. Ask for old Chen. But he will not sell to you. A Yang-Guizi, a foreign ghost, he will not. The Disashi was exactly what it sounded like. Hidden behind a bustling herbalist, accessed through a steel door manned by a brute who looked twice Rico's size. The air inside was thick, humid, heavy with the scent of loam, decaying wood, and strange, pungent herbs. Cages and glass terrariums lined the walls, holding creatures that looked like they'd crawled out of a nightmare. The low hum of insects was a constant, unsettling drone. I found old Chen in the deepest, darkest corner, sitting on a stool as still as a statue. He was ancient, his face a web of wrinkles, but his eyes were like dark pools, impossibly deep and unsettlingly aware. He watched me approach, his gaze seeming to strip away my expensive jacket, my polished shoes, my carefully constructed demeanor, seeing right down to the raw, desperate man beneath. I showed him the clipping from my grandfather's journal. He was silent for a long time. The market sounds seemed to fade away. It is not for you, he finally said, his voice soft but firm, like stones grinding at the bottom of a river. I need it, I said, the words coming out as a plea. I laid my last stack of cash on the small table beside him. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I placed my pocket watch next to it. The ultimate sacrifice, my pride, made tangible. Old Chen's eyes flicked to the watch, then back to my face. A profound sadness seemed to settle in them. Desire is its sustenance, he said, each word measured and heavy. You feed it, it consumes you. What you seek is not freedom from your debt, it is a deeper cage. Your soul is heavier than this silver. He pushed the watch back toward me, but his bony hand swept up the cash. The transaction was clear. He wasn't selling me a treasure. He was accepting a payment to be rid of a curse. He reached behind him and produced a small, unadorned purple clay pot, no larger than my fist. It was sealed with a waxed cloth. As my fingers closed around the cool, gritty surface of the pot, a jolt, like a static shock but colder, shot up my arm. I thought I heard, just for a fraction of a second, a single high-pitched chirp from within, a sound that seemed to vibrate directly in my skull. I had it, the blood-red cricket, the path to my salvation, or my damnation, and it had already cost me more than I knew. The walk back from Chinatown was a blur. The purple clay pot felt like a live coal in my pocket, its weight disproportionate to its size, seeming to pulse with a cold energy that seeped through my clothes and into my skin. Every stranger's glance felt like an accusation, every distant siren a premonition of discovery. I clutched the pot through the fabric of my coat, a paranoid guardian of my own potential ruin. Back in the stark silence of my apartment, the reality of what I'd done came crashing down. The last of my money was gone, traded for a bug in a box and the ramblings of a superstitious old man. The grand, reckless hope I'd felt in the market curdled into a sickening dread. I placed the pot on my desk, under the lone pool of light from the brass lamp, as if putting a suspect under interrogation. This was it. The sum total of the Howard legacy, a man facing financial oblivion, pinning his last hopes on an insect and a century-old ghost story. The absurdity was a physical taste, bitter and metallic, at the back of my throat. I laughed, a short, harsh sound that echoed in the empty room. I was a fool, a magnificent, desperate fool. So, I said aloud, my voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. I was speaking to the pot, to the silence, to the ghost of my grandfather. Here we are. My $1,000,000 salvation. The words dripped with self-loathing. Where is it then, little fellow? Where's my miracle? I don't know what I expected. For it to chirp and spit out a diamond? For a check to materialize from the air? Nothing happened. The dread solidified into a lead weight in my stomach. It was over. I had truly, finally, hit rock bottom. I had traded my last chance for a fairy tale. A wave of utter exhaustion washed over me. I slumped into the chair, my head in my hands, the cool silver of the watch pressed against my forehead. Pride and perseverance. What a joke. And then it came. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air to my eardrums. It was a sensation, a high-frequency vibration that originated directly inside my skull, a single, piercingly clear chirp. It was icicle-sharp and ancient, a sound that had no business existing in my modern apartment. It sliced through the fog of my despair, leaving a trail of crystalline cold in its wake. I jerked upright, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stared at the pot, half expecting it to have cracked open. My phone, lying face down on the desk, buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. A rapid, insistent staccato. With a trembling hand, I picked it up. The screen was lit up with notifications from my banking app. A alert. Large credit transaction. A alert. Account balance update. I tapped the screen, my vision swimming. The login screen felt like it took an eternity, and then I saw it. The dashboard of my primary account, which had held a grand total of $87.12 just minutes ago, now showed a balance of $1,087.12. $1 million, plus my original pittance. I made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. The numbers were right there, in stark, undeniable digits. The debt, the impossible weight that had been crushing me for months, was gone. Erased, paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. My eyes slowly, inexorably, drifted from the glowing screen back to the unassuming purple pot on my desk. It was real. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't a folktale. It was a tool, a key. The initial shock began to recede, and in its place, a new emotion surged, hot and potent and terrifying. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was power. A dizzying, intoxicating sense of power. The old man's warning, desire as its sustenance, flitted through my mind. A feeble ghost trying to haunt a house now flooded with electric light. I batted it away. Sustenance. What did it matter? It had worked. It had chosen me. Grandfather's journal, with its hysterical scribbles about madness and decay, was the work of a frightened, closed-minded man, unable to comprehend the nature of true power. He saw a curse. I saw potential, a correction of the cosmic injustice that had left a man of my breeding in such circumstances. I stood up, pacing the small room, a nervous, exhilarating energy coursing through me. I looked at the packed boxes, the faded patch on the wall. They were relics of a past life, a weaker life. Salvation? I whispered to the pot, my voice now filled with a kind of reverent awe. No, this isn't salvation. I picked up the pot. The coldness I felt before was now a comforting chill, the hum of a well-tuned engine. The single chirp still echoed in the chambers of my mind, a siren song I was now eager to follow. This, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a grin spreading across my face that was entirely new to me, wild, unhinged, and hungry. This is just the beginning. The first seed of the curse had been planted, not in the soil of my apartment, but in the fertile ground of my reawakened greed. And I, the diligent gardener, was already eager to see what horrors it would bloom. The $1 million sat in my account, a silent, pulsating monument to the impossible. For a week, I did nothing. I paid Henderson his rent, 6 months in advance, just to see the shock on his face. I bought a new wardrobe, not the flamboyant rags of a nouveau riche, but the understated, bespoke elegance that whispered of old money and quiet power. The fear of Salvatore's men was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculating. I was no longer a fugitive. I was a predator preparing to hunt. But a monument is useless if you only look at it. I needed to know if the miracle was a one-time gift or a renewable resource. The chirp in my skull had not repeated, but the pot sat on my new, polished oak desk, a constant, silent presence. I found myself talking to it, not with the desperation of before, but with the focus of a strategist addressing his most potent weapon. "Time to go to work," I murmured, placing the pot gently into the inner pocket of my new Zegna suit jacket. It rested against my chest, a cold, comforting weight. My destination wasn't one of the gaudy, tourist-trap casinos. I chose the Airy, a members-only club perched atop a midtown skyscraper. Here, the air smelled of aged whiskey and floor polish, not desperation. The clatter of chips was subdued, the conversations a low murmur about mergers and acquisitions, interspersed with the soft click of a roulette wheel. This was where the real sharks swam, the ones in tailored suits who bankrupted companies for breakfast. I felt their eyes on me, the new face. I saw the subtle assessments, the silent questions. Who is he? Old money? Tech? I offered nothing but a polite, slightly aloof smile. I was playing a part, and the pot against my chest was my secret script. I started small at a blackjack table, a $50,000 bet. My heart was a drum in my throat. This was the test. The dealer's face was impassive. I was dealt a 15, a terrible hand. The dealer showed a 6. Basic strategy screamed at me to stand, but I heard nothing from the pot, no chirp, just the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I took a card, a 9, 24, bust. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Had it all been a fluke? A cosmic error that was now corrected? The other players gave me polite, pitying glances. The facade of the cool, collected gentleman began to crack. I moved to the roulette wheel, my confidence fraying. I placed 10,000 on black. The wheel spun, a hypnotic whirl of silver and red. The ball clattered, danced, and settled. Red. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my mind. I was losing. Not just money, but the very foundation of my new reality. The power was a phantom. The curse was real, but it had only given me enough rope to hang myself in a more expensive venue. I found a secluded baccarat table, the game of high rollers and sheer dumb luck. My hand shook slightly as I placed a $100,000 bet on the player hand. This was it. My last, desperate test. If I lost this, I was finished, a bigger fool than when I started. The dealer dealt the cards. The world narrowed to the green felt, the sliver of pasteboard being turned over. My heart wasn't beating. It was vibrating with a pure, undiluted terror. And then, it came. Not a chirp this time. It was a sensation. A sudden, icy pressure behind my right ear, as if a frozen needle had been gently inserted into my cortex. It was a command, utterly unambiguous. A silent, cold yes. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I slid another 100,000 onto the bet, doubling down. The other players stared. The dealer's eyebrow twitched almost imperceptibly. The cards were revealed. Player, 9, banker, 3. I won. The ice behind my ear melted away, replaced by a wave of euphoric warmth. The chips were pushed toward me, a mountain of ivory and gold. But the money was secondary. The real victory was the confirmation. It was real. It spoke to me. It obeyed me. I spent the next 3 hours in a state of controlled, ecstatic precision. I would place a modest bet, wait for the icy pressure, a no felt like a dull throb in my temples. A yes was that sharp, cold needle, and then I would strike, sometimes quintupling my initial wager. I lost a few hands, just enough to maintain the illusion, but the wins were astronomical. I wasn't guessing, I was harvesting. The other players stopped seeing me as a curiosity. The looks became wary, then resentful, then fearful. I was no longer one of them. I was a force of nature, an anomaly in their carefully ordered world of calculated risk. The pit boss watched me, his expression a mask of professional cordiality over clear unease. When I finally stood to leave, my jacket was heavy not just with the pot, but with the weight of $1 million in profit. A sleek, grim-faced man approached me. Not a thug like Rico, but a financial advisor for the kind of people who owned places like this. "Mr. Howard," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "a remarkable run of luck. Perhaps you'd be interested in opportunities with higher stakes, private games, the kind where real fortunes are made." I looked at him, the aloof smile back on my face, now genuine. The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. All that was left was the intoxicating certainty of my power. "Luck," I said, my hand unconsciously drifting to rest over the pot hidden in my pocket, "is a currency for the mediocre." I walked out of the area and into the New York night, the city lights sprawling at my feet. The chirp, the icy needle, they weren't warnings. They were the keys to the kingdom. I had tested the blade and found it razor sharp, and I was eager to start carving up the world. The private game was held in a penthouse that overlooked Central Park, a space so vast and silent it felt like a museum after hours. The air was different here, thicker, charged with the quiet static of immense, unspoken wealth. The other players were specters, a tech billionaire who barely spoke, an oil heir with dead eyes, and then there was him, Jack Rosen. I'd done my homework. Rosen was a self-made king of the casino and real estate world, a man who'd clawed his way up from the streets of Brighton Beach. He was in his 50s, built like a retired boxer going soft around the middle, but his hands, covered in thick gold rings, still looked like they could break bricks. He wore a burgundy velvet blazer that should have looked tacky, but, on him, screamed of a man so powerful he made his own rules. His laugh was too loud, his jokes were crude, and his eyes, the color of a winter storm, missed nothing. He was everything my breeding taught me to despise: vulgar, nouveau riche, unapologetically brutal. And yet, as the game began, a high-stakes pot-limit Omaha game that made the area feel like a child's playroom, I felt a strange pull. He was my opposite, and in that, he was my mirror. The first hour was a feeling-out process. I bet cautiously, listening. The pot against my chest was silent, the icy needle absent. It was as if the creature within was also assessing the room, the players, the flow of capital. Rosen won a few large pots, his laughter booming, slapping the table with a meaty palm. "Come on, Howard," he roared after raking in a pile of chips large enough to buy a sports car. "That fancy English blood of yours too thin for a real fight? I thought your people invented this game." The insult was deliberate, a probe. I gave him my most condescending, polite smile. "We invented the rules, Jack. The fight came later." It was then I felt it. Not the clear command from before, but a subtle, cold trickle down my spine, a sensation of attention focusing. The next hand, I was dealt a monster draw to a straight flush. I felt the cold pressure behind my ear, a definite, sharp yes. I pushed $250,000 into the center. Rosen didn't even look at his cards. He stared at me, his stormy eyes narrowed. He could feel it too. Not the specifics, but the shift. The introduction of an unnatural variable into his carefully controlled ecosystem. "Well, well," he murmured, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Looks like the kitten has claws," he called. The other players folded, sensing a duel. The board ran out. My straight flush materialized. It was a thing of brutal, mathematical beauty. I reached for the pot. Not so fast. Rosen's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. He hadn't shown his cards. He simply kept his gaze locked on me. "A run like that, it's unnatural. It smells." My heart stuttered, but the cold from the pot was a steadying force. "Are you accusing me of something, Jack?" "Me? Never." He finally flipped his cards over. A full house. A powerhouse hand that would have crushed anyone else at the table. Against me, it was dust. "I'm just a student of probability, and you, my friend, are a statistical anomaly. I find anomalies fascinating. It is and make agents of the first forms, and my mind selvinstang, and my mind standeth for misformsin dargoed." He didn't wait for a reply. He stood, his chair scraping back. "Game's over for me tonight, gentlemen." He nodded to the others, then his eyes landed back on me. "Howard, a word." He led me out onto the massive terrace, leaving the silent opulence of the penthouse behind. The city sprawled beneath us, a galaxy of ambition and ruin. He didn't look at me, instead leaning on the railing, a cigar already lit, its smoke a ghost in the night air. "You know," he said, his voice now devoid of its earlier bluster, "my grandmother, she came from the old country, Odessa. She knew things, talked about the Dybbuk, about spirits that cling to a man, about pacts." I kept my face a mask, but my blood ran cold. He knew, or he suspected. "She used to say," he continued, blowing a smoke ring, "that when a man gets a windfall that isn't his, something else is always collecting the debt. You can't cheat the universe, Howard. The books always balance." I found my voice, layering it with all the aristocratic disdain I could muster. "This is a rather melodramatic conclusion to draw from a simple card game, Jack. Perhaps you're just a poor loser." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "I've lost more than you'll ever have, kid, and I've won more too. I'm not talking about the money." He finally turned to look at me, and in the dim light, his eyes held a knowledge that was ancient and terrifying. "I'm talking about the thing you brought to my table. It has a stink to it, I've smelled it before." He took a long pull on his cigar. "My family, we have our own, let's call it luck. It has a price, a heavy one. I pay mine. You..." He gestured at me with the glowing tip of his cigar. "You just started spending, and you have no idea what you've actually bought." He pushed himself off the railing. "We'll play again, soon. I want to see how long it takes for the collector to come knocking on your door." He left me there on the terrace, the weight of the pot against my chest feeling less like a weapon and more like a brand. I had come here feeling like a god. Now, I felt like a marked man. Rosen wasn't just an opponent. He was a prophet who saw the same damnation in my eyes that I saw reflected in his. The game was no longer about money. It was about which of us would be consumed by our curse first. The encounter with Rosen left a film of unease over my newfound glory, but it was a film I quickly polished away with more wins, more acquisitions. I bought a penthouse overlooking the park, all sharp angles and cold glass, a fortress of solitude that suited my rising status. The money was a river, and I was its master, directing its flow with the cold guidance of the thing in my pocket. The only remnant of my old life, the only piece that didn't fit the sterile perfection of my new world, was Mei Lin. She had been my anchor, the one who held me together when the debt was crushing me. Now, she felt like a mooring line I needed to cut to set sail into darker, more lucrative waters. She came to the penthouse one evening, unannounced. I was in the middle of a complex options trade, the cold pressure behind my ear a constant companion, guiding my clicks. Seeing her there, in her simple, elegant coat, standing on my $10,000 a square foot rug, felt like an intrusion. "Linus," she said, her voice soft but firm, her therapist's eyes scanning my face, reading the tension I thought I was hiding. "You've been avoiding my calls." "Busy," I replied, not looking away from the Bloomberg terminal. The numbers were a beautiful, predictable dance. People were not. Building an empire isn't a 9-to-5 job. "It's not the empire I'm worried about." She stepped closer. "It's you. You look different, thinner. Your eyes, there's a light in them I don't like. A cold light." I finally turned to her, a flare of irritation breaking through my concentration. "A cold light? That's your professional diagnosis? Perhaps it's the light of focus, May, of success. Something you've always been so cautiously ambivalent about." She flinched, but held her ground. "This isn't success, Linus. This is mania. I've heard things. The way you're winning, the things you're buying, it's not just luck. It's statistically impossible. And Jack Rosen? Linus? That man is dangerous." "Rosen is a dinosaur," I scoffed, turning back to the screen. The cold pressure intensified, a silent suetsu to close the trade. "He's jealous. He sees a force he can't comprehend and labels it dangerous. It's the oldest story in the book." "What force, Linus?" Her voice dropped, becoming deadly serious. "Tell me, what is guiding your hand? Is it the cricket?" The word, spoken aloud in her clear, rational voice, was a profanity in my new world. It was like she had taken a sacred relic and thrown it into the mud. I stood up slowly, the chair rolling back silently on the polished concrete floor. What did you say? The cricket. The one you bought in Chinatown. The blood-red cricket from your grandfather's journal. I did some research, Linus. The stories, they're not just stories. They're warnings. The cold sensation in my head wasn't a guidance anymore. It was a spike of pure, defensive fury. She was prying. She was trying to dissect my power, to rationalize it, to take it away from me. The paranoia that had been a quiet whisper at the edge of my mind now roared to life. You've been spying on me? My voice was low, venomous. I was worried about you, I still am. She reached into her bag and pulled out a printout, an academic paper on Chinese folk beliefs about spirit possession and goo magic. This thing, whatever it is, it preys on the vulnerable. It feeds on greed and amplifies it until there's nothing left of the person. It's consuming you, Linus, can't you see that? She thrust the paper towards me. It was covered in her neat, analytical notes. She was treating my miracle like a disease to be diagnosed. That was the final straw. The fragile connection to my old life, to the man who needed her, snapped. I didn't just knock the paper out of her hand. I swept my arm across the desk, sending the terminal, the keyboard, a heavy crystal ashtray, crashing to the floor. The noise was tremendous. Get out! The words tore from my throat, raw and guttural. I was shaking, the cold from the pot having spread through my entire body, icing my veins. Mei Lin stared at me, not in fear, but in a profound, heartbreaking sadness. She didn't move. You are not the man I loved, she said, her voice quiet but clear as glass in the sudden silence. That man had flaws, but he had a heart. This is just a hollow shell, animated by greed. My rage needed a target. My eyes fell on the one object in the room that was a direct, tangible link to that man she loved. On a shelf, next to a cold, abstract sculpture, sat the small, celadon-glazed Chinese teacup she had given me for my birthday, a symbol of a quiet afternoon we'd spent together, a lifetime ago. I strode over, snatched it, and held it up. This, I snarled, is this what's holding me back? Your love? Your rationality? Linus, don't. I hurled the cup to the floor. It shattered into 100 pieces of pale green porcelain, the sound a tiny, final death knell. The moment it broke, two things happened simultaneously. First, the cold presence in my mind surged, a wave of approval so intense it was almost pleasure. Yes, break the ties, they are weakness. Second, for the briefest second, I saw not Mei Lin's horrified face, but another face superimposed over hers, a gaunt, Chinese man with eyes full of infinite sorrow and a quiet, triumphant hate. The man from my grandfather's journal, the man from my peripheral visions, aiming. It was gone in a flash, but the damage was done. Mei Lin looked from the shards of the cup to my face. All the fight, all the sadness had drained from her. She was just empty. Some cages, she whispered, echoing words I had once thought to myself in a different life. You don't see until you're already locked inside. I hope you enjoy your fortune, Linus. I truly do, because it's all you have left. She turned and walked out, not slamming the door, but closing it with a soft, definitive click that was somehow louder than any of my screams. I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of my office and the ruins of the last good thing in my life, the cold from the pot settling into a permanent, comfortable home in my chest. The victory felt clean, unburdened. The last anchor had been lifted. The ship was now adrift in a boundless, dark sea, and I was ready to embrace the storm. The silence Mei Lin left behind was not empty. It was filled with the approving hum of the thing in my pocket. The shattered teacup was not a tragedy. It was a ritual cleansing. I felt lighter, unburdened by sentiment, a pure instrument of will and power. The city below my cold glass fortress was a chessboard, and I was the only player who could see the next 10 moves. But the other players were not idle. Rosen's warning was a pebble in my shoe, an irritant I couldn't shake. And Salvatore had not forgotten his original investment. My sudden, meteoric rise had not gone unnoticed in the shadows where he operated. The anonymous payments, the lavish spending, it was a beacon. They came for me on a rain-slicked night, the city lights smearing like wet paint on the streets below. I was returning from another private game, my mind still buzzing with the cold, precise calculations of the pot. I didn't hear them approach. One moment I was stepping out of the hired car, the next, a sack of coarse cloth was over my head, and a brutal force slammed me against the cold, wet metal of my own building's service entrance. The fear was instant, primal. It was the fear of the old Linus, the debtor. But it was quickly submerged by a new, icy rage. How dare they? How dare these insects lay hands on me? I was hauled into a vehicle, thrown onto a hard floor. I could hear Rico's grunt, Tony's nervous chatter. "Boss is going to be happy," Tony was saying. "Think of the payday." They took me to a warehouse by the docks, a place that smelled of rust, salt water, and decay. The sack was ripped from my head. I blinked in the harsh fluorescent light. Salvatore sat before me on a rickety wooden chair, a king in a kingdom of rot. He was a large, heavy man, his face a mask of bored cruelty. "Linus," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you look prosperous, and you owe me an explanation. And my money, with considerable interest." I straightened my ruined suit jacket, the cold weight of the pot a familiar comfort against my racing heart. The old me would have been begging. The new me felt a sneer twist my lips. "Your money, Salvatore, was a pittance. I've moved beyond your pond." His eyes narrowed. Rico stepped forward, his fist clenched. Salvatore held up a hand. "I heard you got lucky. Real lucky. Some people think you cheated. I don't care. Luck, cheating, it all spends the same. You're going to sign over your accounts. All of them. And then you're going to tell me your secret." "I have no secret," I said, the lie smooth as silk. The cold pressure in my head was building, not a guiding force now, but a coiled spring, a sense of imminent release. Only superior intellect. Salvatore sighed, as if disappointed. "Rico, persuade him." Rico's massive hand closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground. Black spots danced in my vision. I couldn't breathe. Panic threatened to swallow me whole. And then it happened. It wasn't a chirp. It was a screech, a sound of pure, metallic hatred that tore through my mind, so loud I thought my skull would split. At the same time, the purple clay pot grew searingly cold against my chest, a cold that burned. Rico's grip tightened for a second, then faltered. A strange look crossed his face, not pain but confusion. Then, a choked gurgle escaped his lips. His eyes, wide and bewildered, locked onto mine. He dropped me, stumbling back, his hands clawing at his own throat. "Boss, he gasped. It's inside, crawling." His body began to convulse, violent, unnatural spasms that threw him to the concrete floor. He curled into a fetal position, his screams muffled as if something was filling his mouth. His lungs... Tony stared, frozen in horror, his gun dangling uselessly at his side. Salvatore was on his feet now, his chair clattering backward. "What the hell is this? What did you do?" I got to my knees, rubbing my bruised neck, the pot's cold fury now a symphony in my veins. I felt no fear, only a transcendent, awful power. "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice eerily calm. "He's just paying a debt. The books are balancing, Salvatore, just like you said." Rico's convulsions worsened. A dark, viscous fluid began to seep from his nose and the corners of his eyes. His skin took on a gray, waxy pallor. He was being eaten from the inside out. The stench of decay, the same one from my grandfather's journal, filled the warehouse. Tony screamed, a high, girlish sound, and fumbled for his gun. He didn't get a chance to raise it. The same invisible force seemed to slam into him. He clutched his stomach, his eyes bulging, and vomited a torrent of black bile before collapsing next to Rico, his body twitching in a macabre dance. Salvatore backed away, his face a mask of primal terror. He was looking at me, but he was no longer seeing me. He was seeing the thing that clung to me. "Diavolo," he whispered, crossing himself. "Keep it away from me." He turned and ran, his bulk crashing into stacks of crates in his blind panic, fleeing into the darkness of the warehouse. I stood alone in the circle of fluorescent light, surrounded by the twitching, dying bodies of my captors. The screech in my mind had subsided, replaced by a contented, purring coldness. The pot felt warm now, sated. I walked over to Rico's still form. His eyes were open, glassy, fixed on the ceiling. Deep within the pupils, I thought I saw, just for a second, the reflection of a tiny, blood-red insect, mandibles moving. I had feared Salvatore. I had feared his men. Now, I was the thing they should have feared. The collector hadn't come for me. I was the collector. And the curse wasn't just upon me. It was me. I stepped over the bodies and walked out of the warehouse into the clean, cold rain. I didn't look back. There was no need. I knew, with a certainty that was more terrifying than any debt, that the killing had only just begun. This was the true face of my power, and I had never felt more alive. The victory over Salvatore was not a victory at all. It was a coronation into a kingdom of rot. The power was now a part of me, a cold, coiling serpent in my veins. The money meant nothing. The fear in the eyes of my business rivals was a fleeting thrill. The only thing that held any meaning, the only reflection that didn't show a hollow-eyed stranger, was Jack Rosen. His invitation came not as a challenge, but as an inevitability. A final game, the note said, written in an aggressive, slashing script. The location was an abandoned Art Deco theater on the outskirts of the city, a tomb for forgotten glamour. It was perfect. I arrived alone. The place was a skeleton, its velvet seats moth-eaten, the gilded cherubs on the ceiling blackened with grime. Dust motes danced in the single spotlight that illuminated a small, round table center stage. Rosen was already there, waiting. He looked older than I remembered, the bags under his eyes like bruises, but the storm in his gaze was more intense than ever. "No audience," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "We are the audience," he replied, his voice flat. He gestured to the empty seats, for each other, and for them. I didn't need to ask who them was. I could feel them now, more clearly than ever. The pressure in the air wasn't just dust and decay. It was a gathering. In the shadows of the boxes, I saw them flickering shapes. The top-hatted auctioneer from my grandfather's tale, a woman in a flapper dress weeping black tears, and always, in the deepest dark, the gaunt, sorrowful face of a Ming. They were all here, the damned, witnessing the next act. "The stakes," Rosen said, cutting through the spectral silence. He placed a single, worn leather case on the table. "Not money. We're past that. We play for what gives us our advantage." My hand went instinctively to the pot in my inner pocket. It was thrumming with a low, eager frequency. "My cricket." He nodded, opening the case. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a heavy, tarnished, silver signet ring. The crest was a lion, but its face was twisted into a snarl of agony. The Rosen luck, passed down through generations. A weight, a chain. You win, you take it. You lose. He looked at my chest. "I take your little pet." The air grew colder. The things in the boxes leaned forward. This was no longer a game. It was a transfer of malignancy. We played a simple game of chance. One die, rolled on the ornate table. High number wins the round. Best of 7. A child's game, elevated to a ritual. The first roll was mine. The cold needle behind my ear was instant, decisive. 6. Rosen rolled a 4. He didn't flinch. The second roll. My turn. The cold pressure came, but it was strained. Rosen was staring at me, his will a physical force. I rolled a 3. He rolled a 5. The ring on the table seemed to pulse with a dull, sickly light. The third roll. A tie. 4s. The die felt heavy, loaded with the gravity of our shared damnation. It was on the fourth roll that the theater itself seemed to rebel. The single spotlight flickered. Rosen rolled a 2. As the die settled, a cold, different from my crickets, swept through the room, a dry, ancient cold, smelling of desert wind and old parchment. His family's curse. My turn. I reached for the die, but the guidance was gone. In its place was a static hiss. The cricket was confused, distracted by the competing energy. Panic, the old, human panic, began to rise in my throat. "No," I thought, clutching the pot through my jacket. "You are mine. Obey me." I poured my will, my pride, my entire corrupted being into that silent command. The hiss in my mind sharpened, twisted, and then erupted into that same metallic screech that had killed Rico. It was a sound of pure, hateful dominance. I rolled the die. It clattered, spun, and landed. 6. The screech died. The oppressive cold from Rosen's ring shattered. The spotlight blazed back to full strength. The ghostly audience seemed to recoil. Rosen looked at the die, then at me. All the fight, the storm, drained from his face. It wasn't defeat, it was release. He seemed to shrink, his shoulders slumping, the lines on his face deepening into canyons. He aged 20 years and 20 seconds. "You win," he whispered, the words a dry rustle. He pushed the leather case towards me. "It's yours." The weight, the chain, the attention. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It was always hungry. Now it's starving. And you just made yourself the only meal left on the table. He stood, a frail old man where a king had Saturday. He didn't look at me again. He shuffled off the stage and into the darkness of the aisle, disappearing into the shadows without a backward glance. I was alone, victorious. I reached out and picked up the silver ring. The moment my fingers touched it, a jolt of revulsion shot through me, a deep, spiritual nausea. It was cold, but it was a dead, draining cold, the opposite of my cricket's vibrant, predatory chill. I felt it trying to leech onto me, to find a new host. I dropped it back into the case and slammed it shut. The pot against my chest was warm, pulsing with sated power. It had consumed its rival. I had won. I was the last one standing. So why did I feel like I was standing at the edge of a bottomless pit, and the ground beneath my feet was crumbling? Rosen's final words echoed in the silent, watching theater. The only meal left on the table. I had slain my mirror, and in doing so, I had left myself utterly, terrifyingly alone with the thing that was now stronger and hungrier than ever. The silence of the penthouse was no longer sterile, it was predatory. After the theater, after Rosen's final damning words, the world had shifted on its axis. The victory was ash in my mouth. The pot, nestled against my chest, no longer felt like a tool or even a weapon. It felt like a tenant that had officially taken ownership of the house. It started with the lights. They would flicker, not with the city's power grid, but in a slow, rhythmic pulse, as if breathing. The polished concrete floors, once a testament to cold modernity, now seemed to reflect things that weren't there, scuttling shapes in the periphery that vanished when I turned my head. And the sounds. God, the sounds. It was no longer a single chirp or a targeted screech. It was a constant, low-level hum, a chorus of 1,000 tiny metallic legs rubbing together, a sound that seemed to originate from the space between my thoughts. It was the background static of my new reality. Worse were the voices, or rather, the voice. It had shed all pretense of being a guide. Its tone was now intimate, mocking, and utterly possessive. "You see?" it whispered, as I stared at my gaunt reflection in the dark glass of the window. The man looking back had eyes sunken deep into sockets of bruised flesh. "You feared them. The small men with their small threats. Now, there is no one to fear but me, and you don't fear me, do you? We are partners." "I am in control," I rasped, the words feeling like a lie on my tongue. My throat was constantly dry. A sound like dry laughter rattled in my skull. "Control? You are the vessel. I am the will. Look at what we have accomplished. Look at what we are accomplishing." My body was becoming a foreign land. I was shedding weight I couldn't afford to lose, my skin stretching tight over my bones. Sometimes in the mirror, I'd catch a glimpse of movement beneath my skin, a quick, skittering motion, like something burrowing. I developed a sensitivity to light and a craving for things that made my stomach turn. The sight of a rare steak made my mouth water with a ferocious, primal hunger. The scent of old meat from a dumpster was a siren's call. I stopped leaving the penthouse. The world outside was too bright, too loud, too fleshy. I existed in a perpetual twilight. The humming in my head, my only companion. The voice, my only confidant. "She thought you weak," it cooed one night, as I huddled in a corner, shivering though the room was warm. The woman, Mei Lin, she thought her rationality could save you. She thought her love was a shield. It was a cage. We broke it, didn't we? We are so much more than love. The mention of her name was a lance of pure pain through the numbness. It was followed immediately by a surge of violent imagery from the voice visions of finding her, of making her see, of silencing her patronizing logic forever. "No," I screamed, but only in my mind. The voice recoiled, then returned, cold and sharp. "Sentiment, a flaw in the vessel. We will purge it." It was then that I truly understood Rosen's weight. It wasn't the ring, it was this. The constant, grinding pressure of a consciousness that was not your own, eating away at you, replacing you piece by piece. I was being curated, my humanity pruned away to make room for something else. In a moment of lucid terror, I stumbled to the desk where I'd thrown the research Mei Lin had brought me. The pages were scattered, some crumpled, some stained. I smoothed one out, my hands trembling. The academic language swam before my eyes, but key phrases burned through the haze. Symbiotic possession. The host's identity is gradually subsumed. The goose spirit often manifests a telepathic voice, initially perceived as guidance, later as torment. Physical decay mirroring spiritual consumption. A final horrific assimilation. It was all there. A clinical roadmap of my damnation. She had tried to show me, and I had thrown it in her face. I had shattered the teacup. I had shattered us. The humiliation, the regret, the sheer pants-wetting terror of it all crashed down on me. The proud Linus Howard, brought to his knees not by a rival or a debt, but by a bug in a box. The grand irony was a taste more bitter than bile. The humming in my head intensified, annoyed by my lapse into self-pity. Enough. This is beneath us. I clutched the edges of the desk, my knuckles white. I was losing. I could feel the last fragments of me slipping away, like sand through grasping fingers. The craving for raw meat returned, stronger now, accompanied by a phantom taste of copper in my mouth. I couldn't do this. I couldn't become this thing. With a final, desperate surge of the will that had once been my own, I fumbled for my phone. My vision was blurring, the room tilting. I didn't call for help. I didn't plead for forgiveness. There were no words left for that. The phone rang once, twice. When she answered, her voice was cautious, guarded. "Linus?" I squeezed my eyes shut, pouring every ounce of my remaining self into 3 broken, ragged words, the only truth I had left. "You were right," I choked out, the admission tearing something vital inside me. "It's eating me. Save me, or kill me." Then the line went dead, either from me dropping the phone or from the screech of pure, unadulterated fury that erupted inside my skull, blotting out everything else. I came to on the floor of my penthouse, the taste of blood and bile in my mouth. The world was a tilted, nauseating blur. The screech had subsided, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence in my mind, a silence that felt more like a predator holding its breath than an absence of sound. The pot against my chest was a block of ice, its satisfaction replaced by a cold, watchful fury. I had betrayed it by asking for help. I don't know how much time passed. The door opening was a distant event. Figures approached, silhouetted against the city lights. Mei Lin, her face pale but set in determined lines. And beside her, the stoic, ancient form of old Chen. He held a simple brass brazier, glowing with hot coals, and a pouch of herbs that smelled of sandalwood and forgotten earth. The voice in my head erupted, not in words, but in a wave of pure, psychic static, a wall of denial and threat. Send them away. They mean to cage us, to weaken us. I tried to form words, to warn them, but my throat was sealed shut by an invisible force. My body was no longer my own. Mei Lin knelt beside me, her eyes not on my face, but on the subtle, skittering movement beneath my shirt. "Linus," she said, her voice impossibly calm. "Fight it." Old Chen placed the brazier on the floor between us. The heat from the coals was a tangible presence, a stark contrast to the deathly chill emanating from me. He didn't look at me with pity or fear, but with the detached focus of a surgeon. "The bond is deep," he said, his voice low. "It cannot be simply cut. It must be severed. By you." He opened the pouch, sprinkling the herbs over the coals. They sparked and smoked, releasing a fragrant, purifying scent that made the static in my head shriek with renewed fury. "He must confess," Chen continued, his eyes now locking with mine. "Not just with words, but with the soul. He must reject its gifts. He must willingly offer back what was taken." "No," the voice screamed. "It is ours. We earned it. They are liars, thieves." Mei Lin took my hand. Her touch was like a brand of fire, a searing connection to a world I had forsaken. You have to let it go, Linus, all of it. The money, the power, the pride, it was never yours. Tears I didn't know I could still produce streamed down my face, mixing with the grime. The struggle was tearing me apart. The thing inside me was a part of my fabric now, and ripping it out felt like ripping out my own spine. The market, I choked out, the words a ragged whisper forced past the barrier in my throat. Take me to the market. It was the only place, the place where it began, the place where the witnesses, the silent, knowing crowd of the Dishashi could see the reckoning. The journey was a blur of pain and resistance. Every step was a battle. The pot grew heavier with each moment, a malignant heart beating against my own. When we stumbled into the familiar, humid, loamy air of the underground market, a hush fell. The usual drone of insects ceased. Every dealer, every collector, every shadowy figure turned to watch. Old Chen led us to the center of the space. He placed the brazier down. The glowing coals and fragrant smoke were a stark, purifying altar in the heart of this temple to obscure desires. This is the crucible, Chen said, his voice carrying in the absolute silence. The choice is yours, Linus Howard. Hold on to the shadow and be consumed by it, or let it go and face the emptiness you sought to fill. The voice was a torrent now, a waterfall of promises and threats. It showed me visions of unlimited power, of making them all kneel, of keeping Mei Lin as a trophy. It showed me the visceral horror of being a hollow, penniless nobody again. I looked at Mei Lin. I saw no judgment in her eyes, only a profound, aching hope. I saw the shattered pieces of the teacup. I saw Rico's dying face. I saw Rosen's hollowed-out shell. I was so tired. With a scream that tore from the very core of my being, a scream that was part me, part the thing inside me, I wrenched the purple clay pot from my inner pocket. It was burning cold and vibrating violently, as if a star of pure hatred was contained within. I confess, I roared, the words echoing off the walls. The market seemed to lean in. I was greedy. I was proud. I was weak. I wanted what wasn't mine. I hurt the people who cared for me. I am nothing without this curse. The admission was a lightning strike. The psychic static vanished. For one crystalline moment, there was only silence and my own ragged breathing. We could have had everything, the voice whispered, a final pathetic thread of sound. No, I whispered back, we have nothing. And I thrust the pot into the heart of the brazier, directly onto the glowing coals. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The pot did not blacken. It glowed with an infernal, blood-red light. A shriek, both physical and psychic, erupted from it, the agonized death cry of the centuries-old Yuanling. Within, the sound was so high, so pure in its hatred, that the glass terrariums lining the walls cracked. I was thrown backward as if by a physical blast, a searing pain erupting in my chest, as if a part of my own soul was being burned away. I felt a snap, a severing, a release. The world went black. The last thing I saw was the blood-red glow of the pot pulsing once, twice, and then shattering into a million pieces of inert, blackened clay, the unholy light within extinguished forever. Consciousness returned in slow, painful waves. The first thing I registered was the absence of the hum. The silence in my head was just that silence. It was vast, empty, and terrifying. The second thing was the smell. Not loam or decay, but the clean antiseptic scent of a hospital room. I was in a plain, private room. Sunlight, real and unfiltered, streamed through the window. I felt light, hollowed out, as if a cancerous organ, one I had grown accustomed to, had been violently removed. Mei Lin was dozing in a chair by the bed. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her expression in sleep was peaceful. The sight of her there, after everything, sent a pang through my hollowed chest that had nothing to do with any curse. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. The movement woke her. Her eyes opened, focused on me, and filled with a cautious, overwhelming relief. Linus. What happened? The words were a sandpaper whisper. The doctors say you collapsed from extreme exhaustion and malnutrition. She hesitated. There were no other physical causes they could find. Old Chen, he made sure of that. The memories flooded back: the market, the brazier, the shriek, the searing pain. The money? I asked. though I already knew the answer. Gone, she said softly. All of it. The accounts were emptied, the assets transferred to anonymous entities. It's as if it never existed. There was no surge of panic, no grief, only a numb acceptance. The books were balancing, just as Salvatore had said, just as the curse demanded. They found you outside the hospital with nothing but the clothes on your back, she continued. I've been paying for the room. The humiliation was acute, a final fitting punishment for my pride. Linus Howard, reduced to charity. I was in the hospital for a week. The physical weakness was profound, but it was a clean weakness. The cravings were gone. The hallucinations had ceased. My reflection showed a tired, thinner man, but the eyes, though shadowed, were my own again. The skittering beneath my skin had stilled. Mei Lin visited every day. We didn't talk much about what happened. It was too raw, too immense. We spoke of small things, of the future in vague, cautious terms. She never said she forgave me. She was just there, a tether to a world I was no longer sure I belonged in but desperately wanted to re-enter. The day I was discharged, she helped me into a small, modest apartment she had found for me. It was a fraction of the size of my penthouse, filled with second-hand furniture and the smell of the previous tenant's life. It was perfect. That evening, I walked her to her car. The city air was cool and clean, washing away the last of the hospital's sterility. A light rain began to fall, catching the light of the street lamps, painting the pavement in shades of gold and black. Thank you, May, I said, the words inadequate for the debt I owed her. For everything. She looked at me, her face illuminated by the soft glow. Just be well, Linus. That's all that matters now. She got in her car and drove away. I stood alone on the sidewalk, the rain cooling my face. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something like peace. The nightmare was over. I was free. I was poor, broken, but I was alive, and I was me. I turned to walk back to my new, humble home. The rain had intensified, and puddles were forming on the uneven concrete. A street lamp ahead cast a bright, unwavering pool of light. As I stepped into that circle of illumination, I glanced down, as one does to avoid the deeper puddles, and I froze. My shadow stretched out behind me, long and distorted by the angle of the light. But it wasn't the shadow of a man. The head was wrong, elongated, with sharp, angular protrusions that looked unmistakably like the mandibles and antennae of a gigantic insect. It was a stark, black silhouette of a cricket, superimposed over my own form. My breath hitched. I jerked my head, shifted my stance. The human shadow moved with me, but the insectoid outline remained, flickering at its edges, a phantom limb of the soul. I clenched my fist, my heart hammering against my ribs. The phantom shape wavered but did not disappear. It was a part of the picture now, a flaw in the film. I stood there for a long time, watching the rain fall through the light, onto the shadow I now cast. Some cages, the thought came, not in a foreign voice, but in my own, weary and resigned. You don't see until you're already locked inside. And some locks, once turned, can never be fully opened again. The debt was paid, the curse was broken, but the shape of my hunger, the architecture of the greed I had welcomed and fed, had left a permanent warp in my being. It was an echo in the silence, a scar on my soul. I finally turned away from the light and walked towards my building, the rain washing the streets clean. And as I reached the door, under the cover of the pouring rain, I could have sworn I heard it faint, distant, a single, mocking note woven into the sound of the falling water. Chirp.